Okay, we are live.
Thank you. Good morning, and we had a little bit of IT issues this morning, but thank you so very much to ITA for helping us fix that. And I want to welcome everyone to the first virtual meeting of the Health, Education, Neighborhoods, Entertainment, Parks, Arts, and River Committee. It is just after 10 a.m., and this meeting is called to order. And I want to note that the audio for this meeting is broadcast live on the internet at www.lacity.org/government/follow meetings/council-committee-meetings. The live audio can also be heard by telephone by calling 213-621-CITY, C-I-T-Y, or 818-904-9450, or 310-471-CITY, and 310-547-CITY, which is city. And that would be 310-547-3489. And members of the public who would like to call in to offer public comment on the items listed on the agenda should call 669-900-6833. That's 669-900-6833, and use meeting ID number 987-0899-4173. That's meeting ID number 987-0899-4173. Then press the pound sign. Then press the pound sign again when prompted for participant ID. So, City Clerk, can you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Councilmember David Drew.
Present.
Councilmember Mitch O'Farrell.
Present.
Councilmember Karen D. Price.
Karen, you're...
There you go. Present.
Okay, everyone's present, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, colleagues. And I'm going to propose that we go right on to the agenda and we hold items 1, 12, and 13 for discussion. Are there any other items that you'd like to call for special, Mr. Price or Mr. O'Farrell?
Not I, and so moved with your direction.
Thank you. So before we kick it off to public comment, I do have an amendment for item number 12 that I would like to read into the record.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair. Just to confirm, are we? Is it the direction of the committee to approve items 2 through 11 on consent? Is that?
We're going to do that after public comment.
After public comment. Okay, sir.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to read in the amendments for item number 12. My office has been working with Council District 5 as well as Council District 3 on this issue, and have agreed that we need to drill down a little bit more in detail. So I want to recommend that the motion be amended to strike the moving clause and request the Department of City Planning, Department of Building and Safety, the City Attorney, with assistance from the County Department of Public Health as needed, to report back in 30 days on the feasibility of implementing an ordinance prohibiting the sale of living animals for human consumption, including, but not limited to, 1, a precise definition of wet market, and recommendations on establishments and practices that should be prohibited. 2, existing zoning, conditional use, or health code laws that regulate the on-site slaughter of live animals, and an establishment that are currently permitted to do so. 3, departments or agencies that have a regulatory authority and jurisdiction over enforcement of wet market activities. And 4, legal or constitutional issues that should be taken into consideration. Can I get a second on this amendment?
Second.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. O'Farrell.
Mr. Chair, is that item 12?
Item 12.
Maybe I think the CLA needs to read that into the record first.
Oh, I was told that I should read it in, but sure, go ahead.
Okay. Item 12 is a motion, Koretz Blumenfield, relative to an ordinance prohibiting the sale of living animals for human consumption in the city.
Okay, great. At this point, I want to open up the public comment and remind those who have called in to please state your name and the items you would like to speak on when you're prompted to do so. Andrew?
State your name and the items you would like to speak on. Caller, are you there?
Yes. Item number 13.
Thank you. You have 1 minute on the item.
You're not going to call it when it's being considered?
That's in the beginning, so you may begin with your 1 minute public comment for item 13.
One quick second. Just a technical check. Sorry, caller. Is everybody else hearing my staff, Andrew, call the speakers? Or okay, it's just me then. I have a little delay. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, I heard nothing until speaker called, so I didn't hear the rules, I didn't hear the definition, whatever, and I'm not used to speaking at something until the item has been introduced by staff, and then then it goes to public comment. So my name is Glenn Bailey. I'm president of the Northridge East Neighborhood Council. I'm also an officer with the Valley Alliance of Neighborhood Councils and the LA Neighborhood Council Coalition, but I'm speaking as an individual. This clarification of the community interest stakeholder is definitely a step in the right direction since I have limited time because it is identifying in advance locations within the boundaries. I am concerned about spelling out chambers of commerces because many neighborhood councils have business or business representative seats already, so it gives chambers of commerce, which they absolutely should be on neighborhood council, gives them a second bite of the apple. There are many other types of groups that are nonprofits that are not spelled out. I think the ones that are listed here are great in terms of religious and educational and nonprofit, but to spell out chambers of commerce as one specific type should not be included.
Thank you. Caller, would you please state your name and the items you would like to speak on? Caller, are you there? Last time I'm checking. Caller, are you there? State your name and the items you would like to speak on.
Yeah, it's Eric Previn, and I'd like to speak on all items in a general public comment.
Thank you. You have 2 minutes on your items and 1 minute for general public comment. You may begin.
Okay, thanks. So I was noticing the Koretz Blumenfield motion, item 12, about an ordinance prohibiting the sale of living animals for human consumption in the city. And I understand, there's concern that maybe the coronavirus started in Wuhan and there was a market. But I think that when the city of Los Angeles engages in this kind of regulation, sometimes we become so narrow and specific. What's that? Oh, a little confusing. I'm speaking, but I'm hearing myself.
Can you turn off your audio, please? You can turn off your audio on your end.
I don't have any audio on my end. I don't have any. I'll just keep going. But my point is that, we have cultural diaspora all over the world. People do all sorts of interesting things with food. I'm a foodie. You're a foodie. People like to eat different things. But I think that when we get into a narrow regulation like this, it's kind of weird, frankly. I mean, I I don't think anybody wants to be doing disgusting things. And if we look closely, right in our own backyard at the Farmer John's and at meatpacking plants all over the place, and I don't see any regulations being levied beyond the ones that are already in place. It's just a narrow, bad idea. So I appreciate your backing away from that eventually, even though the heart's in the right place. Here you've got lots of little appointments coming through. And LA for Kids Steering Committee, this is a group that looks at the Prop K stuff, among other things. And you have a Prop K item that you're looking at here. This is in my district a great shanda, to use the official term, because we have the last remaining bits of open space, and they are scheming like crazy, the mayor and Krikorian, to put a oversized high school regulation basketball court, very likely to the benefit of a private school or something, because there is simply no demand for it among rank-and-file Studio City residents who love and cherish and really benefit from the last little bit of open space that we have at lovely Beeman Park. So I would just urge that we not seek additional funding from the various measures, the water measure, and the county has some money to try to top it off at $17 million for something that the public doesn't want. The public wants to fix up the general public comment.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to make it real brief but real clear. Yesterday was a travesty because the city council, and you all serve on it, participated in picking and choosing among the various people online. That's not acceptable, to shut public comment down after 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever they did. It's just not acceptable. If people have something to say, they have to be heard, and you happen to know that I have something to say because I'm a regular contributor, and to just not get to me every other meeting is just dark enough to be called out in public, and I'm going to put it to rest. The County Board of Supervisors play the same game. You just simply have to hear from the people. That is your main job. And by canceling all of the committee meetings, by the way, congratulations putting this committee back on this schedule to get your various things approved. But we need to have opportunities to provide public scrutiny and public comment. So with that, I would tell the council president to lean forward and make sure that people are hearing from everybody, not excluding people inappropriately. And with that, good luck.
State your name and the items you would like to speak on. Clerk, please state your name and the items you would like to speak on.
This is Jim Bickard from Council District 5, Councilmember Paul Koretz's office. I'm speaking on item 12.
Thank you. You have 1 minute on the item.
Okay. Councilmember Koretz and Councilmember Blumenfield proposed this item back around the beginning of the pandemic emergency at the encouragement of several animal welfare groups and health groups because of the relationship between the slaughtering of live animals in actual markets or stores, retail establishments on the spot for customers. And it's a lot about the kinds of diseases that turtles who are part of this proposal have been known to carry. That's part of the reason why the federal government bans the sale of really young turtles. It's also about animal cruelty relating to chickens and rabbits and other animals. It's not so much about wet markets per se. We're not trying to ban seafood places. So we would look forward to the committee asking for a report back from Animal Services and perhaps the CLA and the city attorney to see what kinds of nuanced regulation could be put on this kind of activity in the city. Thank you.
Clerk, please state your name and the items you would like to speak on. Clerk, can you hear me?
I was disconnected after I spoke, so I had to call back in.
Did you already make your public comment?
This is Glenn Bailey. Yes, I did.
Got it. Thank you. we have finished with public comment.
Thank you, Andrew. That was the last caller, so we can now close public comment. Colleagues, I'd like to recommend that we move items 2 through 11 on consent if there's no objections.
No objection.
Thank you, Mr. O'Farrell. Seeing none, Mr. Clerk, would you please take the roll call vote on these items? Mr. Clerk?
Yes, sir. Councilmember David Drew.
Yes.
Councilmember Mitchell Farrell.
Yes.
Councilmember Karen Price.
Yes.
We got 3 aye votes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. So we'll move along to item number 1. Mr. CLA, can you please read that into the record?
Yes. Item 1 is the motion O'Farrell, Krikorian, Martinez relative to the formation of a Bring Back Hollywood task force comprised of industry experts and city departments.
Thank you. And Mr. O'Farrell, I want to first commend you for your foresight here. And obviously the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in billions of dollars in losses for the entertainment industry and has thrown more than 100,000 people in the entertainment industry out of work. The governor is expected to roll out a series of steps and criteria for the industry to start reopening, but this is expected to take place on a county-by-county basis. And depending on certain testing requirements and hospitalization capacity. But unfortunately, with more than 2,000 deaths in the county so far, that puts Los Angeles much behind the rest of the state. This means that we need to ramp up our efforts on a few different fronts. We have to ensure testing at scale, increase contact tracing, and self-isolating as much as possible. We need to ensure that we're prepared with the necessary testing, PPEs, and protocols to implement if and when we see a resurgence of COVID-19 this fall or winter. And of course, as you've been leading on, work with the entertainment industry to implement effective health and safety protocols around production, but also adopting creative solutions for remote work. Netflix currently has 220 productions that are in various stages of post-production being done remotely from the employee's home. There isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all approach for everyone in this industry, and we should be making it as safe as possible and as easy as possible for an industry that is the lifeline for the city of LA to come back online. With that said, Mr. O'Farrell, I'm going to turn this over to you, and we have, if you want to recognize all the various people from the departments here. Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Price. I know that the well-being of our signature industry is very important to all three of us and the rest of our colleagues for that matter. We also know that in the LA County area alone, upwards of 500,000 employees are supported by this industry, whether it's in front of the camera, behind the camera, or whether it's an accessory industry that are industries that are represented in all of our communities. This industry, which was refined and brought to the fine art form that it has become over the decades, its home is right here in Los Angeles, and we all recognize that. And yes, we have some important individuals who have also been on the front lines of this issue and leading on this effort, and I'll introduce them in a moment. And I know that we have Mr. Paul Audley from Film LA, which is our contractor for all location filming across the city. And we also have Kevin James on behalf of the mayor's office. Between these two gentlemen and their incredible staffs, we have been working directly with them and others in the industry. As an advocate for this industry, you know, at one time we had an ad hoc film runaway production committee that I served on as well. So for years, since I've been on the council and then previous to that, it's been an issue that we've been focused on collectively and individually. Unfortunately, at that time, it was all about supporting the tax incentives to bring the business back to California. We succeeded wildly in that effort through AB 1839, and the industry began to prosper again to the point of our studios, our sound stages were overbooked, which is a wonderful problem to have. But then, of course, COVID-19 strikes. And now we have to focus on bringing back Hollywood all over again. But we're ready. The building blocks in place. The infrastructure is here. On 1 month ago, on April 29th, we introduced this motion, and we really have in mind looking out for the below-the-industry craftspeople, the costumers, below-the-line folks, the props and set dressers, the drivers, the caterers, all faced with so much uncertainty and losing their income overnight. Although everyone's anxious to resume work, it has to be done with the utmost caution. And we have the business reps working to produce a very well thought out, well researched white paper, which will soon be available. And there's a lot of cross pollination in efforts on this white paper that this city is now part of, on how the below the line industry and line workers can resume safely. These folks are the ones who arrive in the early morning hours before daylight and leave after dark. A lot of these folks are being lured away again to places like Georgia that have zero protections in place. So we want to make sure that we can provide a safe environment for these workers so they're not forced to risk themselves, their own health, just to keep working. So we're kind of, although it seems like we're back to square one, we're ready to launch in a better way. Add to that, SAG-AFTRA studying the best practices on their own to maintain health and safety of their membership. The studio heads studying how to best manage a production that oftentimes exceeds hundreds of workers milling about sound stages in close contact, on and off equipment trucks, sharing equipment and tools. This is going to be a very comprehensive and complicated undertaking. There are going to be costs. So having said all of this, I mentioned virtually Paul Audley and Kevin James will be speaking in a moment around this Bringing Back Hollywood collective initiative. We've had countless task force meetings already. They're also being held out and about within the industry. And know that it's going to be real important that we have a central clearinghouse. At this point, 1 month later, that's even more apparent than when I introduced this motion, that we have a central clearinghouse so that we can percolate all these great ideas down to establish these protocols, get the data, involve healthcare professionals for the protections and recommendations so we can have a reentry of production that's successful while being safe and following the CDC guidelines and physical distancing. So at this point, I'd like to ask Mr. Audley if you could give us a recap of what you've been up to in the last month plus in your collaborations with the County Department of Public Health, the studios, the crafts, the locals, and the trades, and any other task forces that you can inform us about that have been meeting to get this back up and running in as safe a way as possible. So, Mr. Audley, or Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask Mr. Audley to weigh in at this point.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Farrell and members of the committee. I'm actually simultaneously on a county task force meeting with you at the same time, so it's an interesting process with how it's all working. There's actually two tracks happening in the county for the film industry at the moment. One is a smaller working group that's working directly with the County Department of Public Health. There's about 14 folks in that. We are sitting in that group to keep updated. And then there's this larger group, one of 13 industry sectors that was created by the county for a resiliency task force. This one is headed up by Jeff Shell of NBC Universal and has about 15 members. They're tasked with several things to move the projects forward, to put out guidance and to continue to monitor and adjust as time goes on. So they're going to be balancing the same white paper everyone's waiting for against the current information from County Public Health about how we're doing in fighting this virus. In addition, we know there's a lot of activity going on in the various unions and guilds and at each of the studios individually and the MPA. We're aware that the city also has a task force looking at the same concepts. So we're very happy to participate in any way we can, especially in gathering all of that information for you and providing reports back to you about what's happening at the county level. We have gathered and provided to the county a great deal of information from organizations like AICP, the commercial producers, which have come up with their own set of guidelines, and what other states are doing. So the concept of providing best practices, I think, is tremendous. We're happy to do that. And as an organization, we went fully remote on March 12th in anticipation of where we were going. We can function that way as long as necessary, and we are currently ready to start again as soon as those guidelines are in place. I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Paul. That's fantastic. These two task forces, I think, are essential. And I'm so glad to hear you say that there's a separate task force just standing alone to weigh in from the county health department. So that's really great. And then the resiliency task force, you know, colleagues, as Paul just, I think, described perfectly, there's robust effort going on down all the various avenues that will help get this industry back up and running. And in a moment, I'm going to make a recommendation, Mr. Chair, to amend the motion slightly in light of all this activity that we've been experiencing. But before I do that, I would like to ask Commissioner Kevin James to weigh in on some of the work that he's been doing, leading on behalf of the mayor's office. We know that you formed a bit of an A-list group of actors and other professionals in the industry. If you could elaborate on that and how you've been informed, Mr. James, on best practices from hearing directly from those.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you, Council Member, and thank you to the committee for the opportunity to speak to you today. For those listening in, Mr. Audley, thank you as always for your close partnership with us. And Mr. Audley, I thought, described what's going on in the industry in the county quite well. One thing, though, that I would mention regarding your question, Council Member, on the mayor's working group. As you know, the mayor's office has a number of working groups related to a number of different industries, including the mayor's working group for the film and entertainment industry. It's actually chaired by Zach Van Amberg at Apple, co-chaired, and Peter Kramer from NBC Universal. And there have been two meetings. Our most recent one happened yesterday. And there are a number of issues that obviously you would expect are being discussed and are of great importance. And they range from everything you would expect: safety guidelines for being on set, testing for all cast and crew, the frequency of testing, the availability of labs to provide quick responses and results. And then there are these other issues that are critical and right now are sitting in various levels of government. Mr. Audley talked to you about the importance of county health and the work that's happening there. But there's another major issue related to this industry, which is insurance and coverage of risk in case something happens on a set. And you may know there are a couple of bills that have been introduced or on the verge of introduction at the House of Representatives that may have an impact on some of the insurance industry issues that are very important in the industry's ability to start shooting again. We've been also following and been in regular touch with all aspects of the industry, key representatives from the unions and guilds, our labor partners there. Those are big issues for them too, clearly. Representatives of the NPAA and all of the studios. Mr. Audley mentioned that the AICP has put out their own proposed guidelines. So has the Musicians Local 47. Various studios themselves are working in-house on what their protocols will be, as well as representation from agencies that represent the interests of their clients and actors. So it is a very busy industry in many ways on its own. Mr. Audley mentioned Screen Actors Guild and the work that they're doing independently. The Directors Guild is also very involved. And so what will be interesting, and indeed some of the press, not just our standard press like the Los Angeles Times and Daily News, but the entertainment industry press too, has been following this very closely and has talked about the importance that everyone is right now placing on what is the industry, the AMPTP representing the studios, and the labor unions and guilds that are working to get together on the industry-wide white paper that we expect that the governor's office is also waiting for. The date for publication is anticipated to be Monday, June 1st. There was a story yesterday that indicated that they weren't in complete agreement yet, the AMPTP and the guilds and unions, although they expect to be in the coming days. So that June 1 date is still looking like a real date. And the governor's office has also indicated that that is going to be something that they're going to rely on in going forward with what some of their guidelines that they will propose relating to the counties across the state. You may know that there was, and I think Councilman Rue referenced this, there was a brief statement in the governor about a week ago, maybe 8 days ago, in his virtual meeting where he had a number of folks from the industry there, where he indicated that there might be a carve-out on the release of restrictions for the county of Los Angeles because of our higher COVID numbers. But there is optimism that with the industry white paper coming forward, that carve-out may not be as long as it had been previously anticipated to be. So we'll see. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
That's great. Thanks, Mr. James and Mr. Audley, very much. We'll all very closely scrutinize that white paper because no one is going to understand the way the county works better than the collective we who are directly involved in this at the Los Angeles level. So I look forward to that. And
Councilman, can I add one more thing, because this is really important to you, to your committee. And please do not, and important to Paul Audley and Eva Batar on our staff who's on the line, something that's very important, and this is being included, and this is a key discussion in all these meetings, is the importance of messaging and working with our communities and our neighborhoods. For on-location filming, that's something I know is critically important to you and your colleagues, because there's one thing about filming on sound stages and studios in a more controlled environment, but in this new post-COVID environment, the approach to our communities and our neighborhoods is something that is certainly on everyone's mind when it comes to health and safety.
I appreciate that, Kevin. Yeah, that's definitely one of the moving clauses in the motion, and I'm going to get to that in a second, but I think Mr. Audley has something to add.
Just that you're aware that we do have 4 full-time folks on community relations. They have already begun, at the city's request, reaching out to hundreds of community contacts to let them know how we'll communicate, that they're going to get information about the safety aspects of it, and giving them a place to come back to if concerns are raised as we go forward. So we'll be looking forward to working with both the county and city on that communication out to those hundreds of local business and community contacts.
Great. The only thing that I would add in terms of all of the considerations that I hope to see reflected in the white paper and the conversations that are happening, especially with the County Health Task Force, and that is, we know that the technology exists to do COVID-19 testing with nearly instant results, 5-10 minutes, if you will. It would seem to me that hopefully by the time we do resume whatever the new normal looks like in terms of production, that instant testing capability will have grown and will become robust enough to have on set for everyone involved in any production on location. So I think that's going to be really important moving forward, that our medical and health experts are really looking at how to make that instant testing available on sets. I think that would go a long ways into addressing some of the insurance and risk concerns as well, but that's just something that I'm looking at closely, personally, and doing some personal research on that. And I'm hopeful that within weeks and not months, those types of testing will be more readily available. And so what you've both conveyed and what we're talking about is a way to synthesize all of these ideas and discussions to come up with something that works for Los Angeles. So I think we're in good hands with all the activity that's going on and everyone who's working on this. Mr. James, you mentioned on-location filming, in particular, city-owned properties, and no public building is more filmed and put upon as a location than LA City Hall. So we want to make right. So we want to make sure that we can get this building open again and production. Every single day of the week, there are commercials, television shows, and feature films that are shot here at this historic building, and then countless other public facilities. So of great importance is how we protect city workers, how we keep the facility sanitized and clean. And so that is really, really important to me as well. So lastly, talking about convening all the great minds, and believe me, I'll open this up for others to comment, but Mr. Chair, what I'd like to do is go ahead and, having heard what we just did in terms of all that's going on, all the great work that is going on, various task forces, I would like to amend the motion to delete the first moving clause. As I understand, there is already a task force, in fact, multiple task forces in place. So I'd like to, rather than be expansive, but to really focus on addressing the on-location filming, in particular on city-owned properties, which would meet as needed with the necessary departments to ascertain which locations and facilities can safely accommodate filming, best practices to accomplish that location filming during the time of COVID-19 and until such time vaccinations and or instantaneous testing are readily available. So I would like to in the motion to delete that first moving clause.
Yes, Mr. O'Farrell? No problem.
And my office is working with Film LA to coordinate this effort, so we all have a sincere desire to make it work. And the institutional knowledge on how on-location filming works. And I'd like to take a moment to especially thank my director who focuses on policy, Christine Peters, for her involvement in this, and then my legislative director, Star Parsamian, who are working closely to help, in the collaboration of all these efforts that get people back to work safely.
Great. Thank you, Mr. O'Farrell. Colleague, Mr. Price, any questions? Nope. Great. Hearing none, I want to recommend, I first want to commend you again, Mr. O'Farrell, for taking the lead on this issue. Not only do you represent the majority of Hollywood as we know it, this is the entertainment industry is Los Angeles. Hollywood is Los Angeles, and we need to do everything possible to help bring them back. And I look very much forward to all the task forces and all the work. While we're going to pass this motion on to the council today, we are going to be in close collaboration, and we expect lots of report backs and working together with both Kevin James, our film czar, as well as Film LA and everybody else involved, all the industry executives and folks in the entertainment industry. So I want to recommend that we approve the motion as amended and move it along to council. Mr. Clerk?
Yes, sir.
Do we have to reread? We don't have to reread that in the amendment, right? You got it? You got the amendment?
Yes, sir. We just have to take the vote.
Great. Let's take the call. Roll call vote.
Councilmember David Drew.
Yes.
Councilmember Mitch O'Farrell.
Aye.
Councilmember Karen D. Price.
Karen, you got to unmute. We're doing the vote. I can't hear you. Okay, one more time. Go ahead.
Can you see me?
There you go.
Can you see me?
Yeah, we can see you, but we can hear you.
You can see, just can't hear. Okay.
Yeah. But we got your aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
This item is approved. Mr. CLA, let's now move on to item number 12. If you could read that into the record. Madam CLA?
Yes. Do you mean item number 13, Mr. Chair?
No, item number 12.
12. Okay. So item number 12 is a motion, Koretz Blumenfield, relative to an ordinance prohibiting the sale of living animals for human consumption in the city.
Thank you, Madam CLA. And as we know very well that at this point, COVID-19 likely originated from a wet market in Wuhan. And we're already neck deep in the current pandemic, but this discussion is about preventing future pandemics. And it's important that we get this right. So as I amended it before on this item, I want to see if any of my colleagues have any questions or comments. Seeing none, I want to recommend that we approve this item as amended. Mr. Clerk, can you take a roll call vote?
Sir, Councilmember David Drew.
Yes.
Councilmember Mitchell Farrell.
Aye.
Councilmember Karen Price.
Aye.
Okay, we got an aye vote on, sir, from all the members.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. This item is approved. So we're going to move on to our last item. So can the CLA please read item number 13 to the record?
Item number 13 is a Department of Neighborhood Empowerment and City Attorney report and draft ordinances relative to adding Section 22.801.1 to the Los Angeles Administrative Code, establishing a revised definition of community interest stakeholder for neighborhood councils, amending Section 20.36D and 22.811A2 to reference the revised definition and repealing Section 22.806B to remove the current definition of community interest stakeholders and adding Section 22.814 to the LAAC to establish a uniform minimum voting age, minimum board member service age, and optional youth board seat for neighborhood councils.
Thank you, Sochi. Sorry about that. Thank you, Sochi. For the record and for people listening in, I want to let people know that on the line we have Ruth Kwan, Steve Houchin, Elise Rudin from the City Attorney's Office. We also have our City Clerk, Holly Wolcott, also on the line. And we have our General Manager from Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, Raquel Beltran. We also have Mike Fong and Semi Park as well. So these ordinances are a long time coming. And I really want to thank the City Attorney's Office, the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, and everyone else involved, especially all the stakeholder groups and the community groups, for their immense amount of work that went into crafting these reform measures. So when I took over this committee, I set out to engage the neighborhood councils throughout the city and have had a discussion about improvements that could be made to make governance easier, more accessible, and better supported by the city departments, and make sure that the election process is more efficient, effective, and transparent. These are the last two pieces of reforms that we've discussed. So at this point, I want to turn it over to the City Attorney's Office. Ruth and Steve, do you mind walking us through both the ordinance and then I'd like to have Raquel and Holly talk about the implementation process and timeline for the Neighborhood Council bylaw amendments. So Ruth and Steve?
Good morning, council members. This is Deputy City Attorney Steve Houchin. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So our office has provided you with the two draft ordinances related to the neighborhood council reforms you were mentioning. The first establishes a revised definition of community interest stakeholder. And then the second relates to age eligibility for the neighborhood council voting and board member service. And then also allows for one optional youth board seat. So the way we'd like to do this, council members, is I'll be discussing the community interest stakeholder ordinance, and then my colleague, Ruth Kwan, will be discussing the age eligibility and the youth seat ordinance. And then, of course, we'd both be happy to answer your questions if you have any. So related to community interest stakeholder, the draft ordinance you have before you creates a new standalone section to the administrative code, and it essentially defines what is a neighborhood council stakeholder. And in doing so, this new section restates the charter's definition of a stakeholder, which is an individual who lives, works, or owns property within the boundaries of a neighborhood council. And then what it does is include the revised definition you requested of community interest stakeholder. So currently, a community interest stakeholder is defined as a person who affirms a substantial and ongoing participation within a neighborhood council's boundaries and who may be in a community organization. And currently, the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners is authorized to define what types and duration of contacts constitutes a substantial and ongoing participation. So what the revised definition does is replace that standard, and it more simply defines a community interest stakeholder as an individual who is a member of or participates in a community organization within a neighborhood council's boundaries. The ordinance defines then what type of community organization qualifies under that new definition. And so namely what that is an entity that has continuously maintained a physical street address within the boundaries of the neighborhood council for not less than 1 year, and that performs ongoing and verifiable activities and operations that confer some benefit on the community. And this definition does not include for-profit entities. So an individual who is a member of or participates in such a community organization would qualify as a community interest stakeholder under the revised definition. Just so you know, you'll see in the draft ordinance that it actually amends 2 other administrative code sections to reference the newly revised definition, and then it repeals another administrative code section to remove the current substantial and ongoing participation standard. That was done to harmonize all the changes that are being made. So that's a brief summary of the community interest stakeholder ordinance, and I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague Ruth Kwan so she can give you an overview of the other ordinance.
That is based on that fear is unfounded, that poor people are not dangerous, and that homelessness should not be criminalized.
Good morning, council members. Deputy City Attorney Ruth Kwan of the General Counsel Division. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, go ahead.
So like the community interest stakeholder ordinance, the age eligibility and use seat ordinance was born out of this committee's proposals for NC system reform. In late October, the full City Council requested that the City Attorney's Office draft the ordinance before you, was transmitted in February and referred to this committee just prior to the Safer at Home orders. The draft ordinance establishes 3 broad reforms for the neighborhood council system. So first, the draft ordinance establishes a uniform minimum voting age requirement of 16 years to vote. Second, the draft ordinance establishes a uniform minimum board service age. That is, in order to be eligible to serve as a board member, a person must be 18 years or older. Now, the only exception to these 2 age eligibility requirements is embodied in the 3rd reform. The draft ordinance establishes that a neighborhood council will have the option to institute up to 1 youth board seat. If a neighborhood council opts to have that youth seat, it will be filled by a minor who's between 14 and 17 years old on the day of the election or selection, whatever may apply, and a minor as young as 14 may vote for that youth board seat candidate. Finally, in order to avoid any unintended disruption to the constitutions of the current NC boards, this ordinance would contemplate that the changes will be applied prospectively, not retroactively. In other words, the currently seated NC board members can serve out the remainder of their term. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Steve. Raquel, do you want to walk us through the implementation process that Dunn's on Dunn's side? Raquel, you got to unmute yourself.
I appreciate the opportunity to come before you this morning, and thank you, Council Members Price and O'Farrell, for allowing us to come back to you this morning. And we are happy to actually bring, along with our colleagues, 2 of some of the remaining reforms that the City Council approved. Certainly before our time and my time with the department, I'm now going on 9 months. as the general manager of the department. And when we came to you earlier, we were looking at having 4 reforms still in progress and a couple others that were going to require a little bit longer term strategies, but these are 2 of the 4 that were in progress, so we're happy to kind of continue our efforts to bring closure to the reforms that were so important to you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and also to the City Council. In terms of implementing these amendments, we had extended the deadline for neighborhood councils to revise their bylaws to June the 5th. During the pandemic, neighborhood councils were challenged to have meetings. We rolled out the virtual governance and parallel virtual governance plan and protocols. On May the 1st, neighborhood councils have now been robustly trying to address all of the unfinished business that they have had on the table. June 5th was the extended deadline for the neighborhood councils to initiate action to modify their bylaws. So next week will be the deadline for that. Moving forward, we've been working very closely with the city clerk's office to review a list of some, priority bylaws amendments that were necessary based on the city clerk's assessment during the last election of what was just kind of fundamentally confusing and creating challenges for them in terms of the administration of the elections in 2019. So after the June 5th deadline, we'll be able to assess which neighborhood councils have already adopted this language or some aspect of the language in their bylaws. They know that this language is kind of coming down the line and could have chosen and maybe choosing to address some of these issues as we move forward. And at that point, we'll circle back with the city attorney's office and the city clerk's office to determine how we want to proceed at that point. There is some authority in the ordinances that allow our offices to implement these bylaws. Some of it would be administrative in nature. There are about 6 or so that would have structural changes based on the number of youth seats that they may have already, which means that one of the youth seats will have to phase out. Individuals currently in those seats will be able to complete their terms and won't be kicked off of their board while the implementation of these ordinances goes into effect. I'm happy to answer any questions, and we're really glad to be able to move forward on these items. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Raquel, and thank you for jumping right in with 2 feet, with both your feet. We knew that there was a lot of massive reforms that we were implementing at Dunn, but I'm sure you didn't think it was going to be under the backdrop of the pandemic, but thank you for leading the department and helping all the various neighborhood councils get online. Holly, do you want to...
I just do want to acknowledge the 2 colleagues that have been instrumental who are joining us this afternoon, and that is our Director of Policy and Government, Mr. Mike Fong, and also our Director of Operations, Ms. Semi Park, who've been instrumental in getting us to this place. So thank you very much, Semi and Mike.
Here, I second that. My office has worked closely with both of them, and they're fantastic in everything that they do, especially during these difficult and challenging times. So, Holly, do you want to walk us through the timeline and the implementation process for the clerk's office?
Good morning, Holly Walcott, City Clerk, and again, I also would like to thank the committee for hearing this item today, and all my staff, and of course, working with Dunn has been a great benefit to us all. Our timeline has and continues to be July 1 for any changes, and the reason that this deadline has been such a hard deadline is because if you consider that the election period really starts in November, if you give us July, August, September, and October, that's 4 months to do any programming and to get this all set up. So that's why we have held fast to our July 1 deadline for any bylaw changes. Now, we have worked with we've been set up committees and have taken input via, we started out before the pandemic where we were meeting, my staff was meeting with various working groups on different items, and that continues now virtually so that we get input from each of our stakeholders and neighborhood councils for the 2021 elections. But we're set and ready to go with these changes.
Holly, do you want to add something else?
No, I said end of report.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. Thank you, Holly. And I want to turn it over to my colleagues. Mr. O'Farrell or Mr. Price, have any questions or comments? Seeing none. And did we lose Councilmember Price? Actually, I think he might have dropped off the call. Maybe technical. Okay, no, he's here. I apologize. My screen had got adjusted. Sorry, this is my first virtual committee meeting trying to get adjusted. Sorry about that, Councilman Price. I didn't see your name. It's your staff's name right there. Okay, thank you. So if there's no further questions, I want to recommend that we receive and file the Department of Neighbor and Empowerment's report and move to approve both ordinances. So, Mr. Clerk, can you please take a roll call vote?
Yes, sir. Councilmember David Drew.
Aye.
Councilmember Mitchell Farrell.
Aye.
Councilmember Karen Price.
Yes.
We have an aye vote from all the committee members, sir.
Thank you. This item is approved. Madam Clerk, do we have any additional business to take care of on the agenda?
The desk is clear.
Okay. Thank you. So, colleagues, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Recording stopped.